Okay, greetings to you all.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm glad to have a lot of you online this morning.
Thank you, sir.
I think there's no challenge with entering
Good morning,
the
sir.
class this morning.
No problem, sir. No challenge at all.
Okay. So in today's lecture, please, I would want you all to mute your mics so that maybe when we are done with the lectures, then we can discuss further. In today's lecture, our emphasis would be on Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy and the classification system that exists within an organization. And in furtherance of that, we'll be looking at the spoil systems and the merit systems and how they have aided or have sought to explain or guide an understanding of how organizations have functioned from the classical period and the theories that guided that era to modern day practice of what public administration is about and how organizations have functioned in relation with their internal structure side by side their external environment. So before today's class, we saw how the board type and the bureau type aided the chain of command that existed in an organization. And in the last class, we saw different categorizations of the practices that can be found within an organization, be it a public organization or a private one. And then the administrative structure that revolves around the systems that we looked at in the last class. And in that, we're able to show the correlation between the bureaucratic model as a system that tends to reflect some measures of autocracy in how the government is managed, and when narrowed to how organization functions, in how the chief executive is the custodian of the final authority and the arbiter of decision making within the organization. And then we went further to also look at the aristocratic system, where we say that just like the board type, there are advisory bodies that guide the decision of the chief executive or who is considered as the final authority within the system. And then we also looked at the democratic type, where we said that the level playing ground is provided for every individual to thrive and to rise from the lowest rung of the ladder to the highest position of authority within the system. So in today's class, we will go further to look at how other attributes or other aspects guide the internal workings of an organization. And the first of it is Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy. You know, when you hear bureaucracy and Max Weber's idea of it quickly comes to mind a hierarchical arrangement that shows the levels of categorization, the promotion arrangement, the cadre of information, and how subordinates relate with their superiors within the work system. So we say today that Max Weber is an eminent sociologist, and he gave a systematic analysis of bureaucracy. No study of bureaucracy was considered complete till Max Weber's view of bureaucracy are known. He developed a typology of authority, traditional, charismatic, and legal bureaucracies. To him, bureaucracy sustained and certified by the legal authority is the most effective form of organization. So in his own view, that when you have a structure that is well stated and well defined, it aids how information flows and how the organization tends to revolve itself around its internal structure and its external environment, and that this streamlined pattern of authority tends to promote efficiency and effectiveness within an organization. So there are other variants of bureaucracy as well, but his own typology, his own understanding has gained prominence when one talks on issues of bureaucracy than all other consideration or all other theoretical arrangements that have sought to explain bureaucracy. But the central point of bureaucracy simply shows a step-by-step analogy of how information or how an organization functions from the superior to the subordinates or from the top to the lowest rung of the ladder in terms of the categorization that exists in an organization. To him, bureaucracy sustained and certified by the legal authority is the most effective form of organization. However, what Weber was concerned mostly with was discovering the canons of social behavior of bureaucracy. In this, he was led to depict and analyze an ideal type of bureaucracy, He never meant to suggest goodness or badness, but to suggest a standard or model. What this statement is simply trying to say is that he spelled out the acceptable standards that should guide how an organization functions, that it should not be built on the emotions or the feelings of the individuals involved, but should be concerned about productivity and result orientation that should be looked at within an organization. In other words, he proposed a system where the role of the individual or the feelings of the individual would not come in conflict with the duties that such an individual performs. So for him, efficiency is paramount when one talks on how organization is built around bureaucratic tenets. In line with that, as we make progress in this work, it is expected that we should be able to explain what bureaucracy is about at the end of this lecture and list the essential characteristics of this theory, its evaluation, states the meaning of classification, its standardization, and movement in the public service, explain why SPOIS system was invoked in USA, state the purpose of career service, and a whole lot of other aspects that we should familiarize ourselves with as we make progress in this course. So having said that, Max Weber's conception of bureaucracy has it that when the word bureaucracy came into usage in the 18th century, it referred explicitly to political systems dominated by public officials. The word was conceptualized as a parallel to the traditional Aristotelian categories on monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. So let me pause here and try to explain that his idea of bureaucracy is a departure from the earliest practices of administration. Remember in the first class, or I think the second class, we saw various theories that explained how administration and organizations evolved. And we saw that in the earliest practices, human beings were treated like machines within the organization or within the production arrangement. And the interest of the individual was not considered. They were more concerned with productivity. So Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy is an advancement of that earliest aspect of the theoretical explanation of organization and administration. And his own view now has gone a step further by showing that to attain efficiency, the individual must follow a pattern that provides result and shows that certain aspects must always be put in place to guide efficiency and productivity within the system. So having said that, his views are a departure from the other practices that we had looked at in the other class about aristocracy, democracy, and the autocratic arrangement that we looked at. But have it in mind that it is all about the easiest flow of information and the type of leadership that exists within an organization. So all these various practices, to a large extent, guides how information flows within a system. So like aristocracy, however, bureaucracy came to refer to a class rather than a system dominated by that class. Max Weber, a highly perceptive observer, first noticed the dynamics of bureaucracy in the emergent large organization after, after, okay, after the Industrial Revolution in 1900. He made equal efforts to analyze the concept and dynamics of bureaucracy so much that he is regarded as the father of bureaucracy. Still is in line with the whole idea of his own perspective on what bureaucracy is about. In Weber's essay in Sociology, he wrote by way of definition of bureaucracy that the fully developed bureaucratic mechanism, sorry, I'm just trying to ensure that you all see the write-up as it is contained in the material, that his own idea fully developed bureaucratic mechanism compares with organization exactly as does the machine with the non-mechanical modes of production. Precision, speed, unambiguity, knowledge of the files, continuity, discretion, unity, strict subordination, reduction of friction, and material and personal costs. These are raised to the optimum point of the strict bureaucratic administration. What this is simply trying to say is that what he expects from a bureaucratic system is a system that is built around precision, result orientation, speed, knowledge of the internal workings of the system. And that when you have all this put in place effectively, and the staff, employees and employers understand adequately what is expected of each person in each role that the person plays, that the result would be that of efficiency and effectiveness in line of production and productivity. So the more bureaucracy is dehumanized, that is removing the personal feelings that ordinarily can come in conflict with the extent of productivity that is expected in an organization, the more completely it succeeds in eliminating from official business, love, hatred, and all pure personal business and emotional elements which escapes calculation. So for him, when you allow your personal feelings to come in contact or in conflict with your levels of production or the role you are to play within an organization, then there is the tendency that it will be abused. So in his own perspective of bureaucracy, that the human aspect that portends maybe bias to certain ideas, or that shows maybe some measures of a feeling and attachment to certain principles should be laid off for there to be effectiveness and efficiency within the system. Like we all know it, it is common knowledge in this part of the world that in your workplace, for instance, when you find a person that speaks your language, there's a tendency that you would lean towards doing what the person wants you to do and compromise the standard, and that is what he is trying to guide against by his own typology of bureaucracy. That people should do away with personal feelings that will come in conflict with the roles that they are charged to carry out within an organization. So this conception of his does not represent an average of the attributes of all existing bureaucracies or other social structures. Remember, like we said earlier on, he is considered as the father of bureaucracy. Doesn't really mean that he is the final authority within the discourse of bureaucracy. So some other persons or some other scholars that have also written on bureaucracy feels that you cannot entirely separate the levels of productivity or involvement of an individual or an employee in the workplace from his personal feelings of showing love or showing some attachments or even sentiments and biases towards certain standards, that does not really affect the levels of productivity of such an individual. But in his own view, that the best you can do to attain productivity is to ensure that there is equality within the system and that the feelings of the individual does not come in conflict with the roles that such an individual is to carry out within the work system. It is rather a pure type in itself derived from the most characteristical bureau aspects of all known organizations. Thus, Max Weber's postulation postulates an absolutely instrumental role of bureaucracy. In line with that, his definition of bureaucracy sees it in terms of its structural characteristics. The above-mentioned concepts or attribute portrays a kind of organization which is impersonal. Here, authority is exercised by administrators only by virtue of the office they hold, and what is more in accordance with the clearly defined rules and regulations that exist within the system. In other words, bureaucracy emerges as uniquely impersonal, neutral, passive, and instrumental. Its behavioral characteristics are objectivity, precision, and consistency. So if you look at this statement, that tends to sum up what his idea of bureaucracy is about. He projects a system that guarantees an impersonal posture that shows that the feelings of the individual does not matter in the workplace, but rather result orientation, efficiency, and effectiveness should be the guiding principle. And he sums it up that within the workplace, objectivity should be the guiding principle, precision and consistency, and impartiality and impersonality are all features that should guide how an organization functions. So there are essential characteristics of this theory by Max Weber, and they are selection by merit is the first of it. You know, when you have a system that is built on objectivity, that is built on result orientation, and does not reflect the personal wills of the individual involved, there is the tendency that it will be a merit arrangement, that people will rise within positions of authority in such a system on the premise of merit and on the basis of showing that result orientation is the hallmark for existence in such an organization. He also talked about fixed remuneration of officials in terms of the reward system. Officials are subjected to discipline and control during the performance of his duties. Hierarchy of office. Remember, we talked about information flow from the superior to subordinate. That is his definition of hierarchy of office in such a system. Allocation of activities of organization necessitated to fulfill its objectives. Apportioning of authority needed to discharge its activities. Rigid adherence to rules. In other words, the purest type of exercise of legal authority is that which employs bureaucratic administrative staff. So if you look at these characteristics that is expected of the system, it shows that it is built around attaining the goals or the principles and objectives of the system. So it is devoid of any levels of partiality or the feelings of the individual coming in conflict with the role such an individual is expected to play within the system. So in other words, only the supreme chief of the organization occupies his position of authority by virtue of appropriation of election or having been designed for the succession. But even his authority consists in a sphere of legal competence. The whole administrative staff under the supreme authority there consists in the purest type of individual officials who are appointed and function according to certain criteria, such as they enjoy personal freedom or subjected to authority regarding impersonal official obligations. Each office legally enjoys a clearly defined sphere of competence. Candidates are selected on the basis of technical qualifications. So if you have a system that is built around merit, that is built around impartiality, it therefore means that even if positions are based on succession, that the idea will still be built around carrying out the best function in the best interest of the organization. So it is not a personal arrangement, or it's not an arrangement that is subjected to the manipulations. It should be a standard practice that treats all and sundry equally within the system. So that is his own conception and idea of what bureaucracy is about. And that even when elected positions or appointed positions are given, it should still reflect the character that exhibits expertness, impartiality, and the absence of humanity. The absence of humanity in this case, remember, like I said earlier on, is premised on allowing your personal feelings to come in conflict with the duties that you are to perform within the work system. In the earlier text we saw, it was described as dehumanization. It does not mean, in other words, the term that one would consider it as, but simply that the personal feelings of the staff within an organization should not come in conflict with the roles that they are expected to perform. So in his own conception of bureaucracy, that the principle should be premised on impartiality, objectivity, and expertness, and that people should gain position on the basis of their smartness and technical qualification for such a job. Unlike as we saw in the aristocratic arrangement, and that we will still see when it comes to the spoil system, that anybody can be brought from anywhere without recourse to the levels of qualification or technical expertise that such a person wields within the system. So at the discretion of the chief executive or the minister or the president, as the case may be, anybody can be brought in from anywhere and put in charge of positions of authority. So in his own view, that even when that happens, that the principle should be premised on result orientation and impartiality within the system. So having said that, his evaluation of the concept of bureaucracy is not entirely infallible. Impartiality, expertness, hierarchical structure, career service, and proper discipline checks, though with honorable service conditions, are some of the laudable points of Weber's theory. However, his characteristics of bureaucracy as absence of humanity is an exaggerated view. Remember, like I said earlier on, other persons that have written on bureaucracy have sought to explain that you cannot entirely separate the feeling of the individual or some extent of bias that the individual is built with, that is innate in the person, that you cannot separate it from the duties that the person performs in an organization. So as such, his idea of impartiality, the expertness and objectivity is not infallible, which means it can be subjected to criticism and there can be error latent in that system. So his view has been criticized on that premise that as an individual whom, like we saw earlier on in the Houghton experiment, reacts to the working condition or the extent of reward or stimulations within the organization, that in as much as the individual would react to this arrangement, it therefore means the feelings that Max Weber is saying should be devoid of or done away with because of the work system cannot be entirely guaranteed. So as individuals, there's the tendency that you will lean towards some levels of bias or some levels of preference to certain conditions as against total objectivity and as against expertness and all that. Like I made mention earlier on, that it is human nature to tend to react towards people that show some levels of affinity with you in the workplace. It could be on the premise of language or religion or cultural practice and all that. So there are other theories that have said that his position appears to be too rigid and does not give room for flexibility of the individual in terms of feelings and other aspects that can come in conflict or in constant interference with the roles that the individual is supposed to perform in the workplace. So a modern bureaucrat is not supposed to be highbrow, snobbish individual living in the ivory towers that is feeling too important, dealing with human beings as if they were abstractions. He knows it for certain that he is dealing with a human being who have their own aspirations. As such, he cannot ride over them. If he does so, the government becomes unpopular. No popular government will tolerate such an official who is responsible for its unpopularity that might result in darkening of its future prospects. What this is simply trying to say is that, in as much as his own view holds that people should not allow their feelings to come in conflict with the role they perform, there are some cases that you must show some bias or tendencies to favor a particular policy of government or the duties that one is exposed to in the workplace. And when that becomes the issue, you must therefore not appear too high-handed or not appear too snobbish because you want to maintain the standard of impartiality and objectivity within the system. That there are cases where you would now tend to do the bidding of the government in power or the duties of the chief executive within such an administrative arrangement. As such, he is required to serve the civilian well. Henderson rightly remarks, experience tends universally to show that pure bureaucratic type of administrative organization is from a purely technical point of view capable of attaining the highest degree of efficiency. And is in this sense, formally, the most rationally known means of carrying out imperative control of human beings. It is superior to any other form in precision and instability as well. So the whole idea here built is that, take for instance how political parties function and how when they come to power, they appoint those that will do their bidding. So if your loyalty and allegiance is to the power that has brought you into that position of authority, there's the tendency that at some point or within certain conditions, you would tend to tilt towards the interest that have brought you to power than the aspect of objectivity that would be the interest of all and sundry. So it is normal human practice to experience that within the work system. So no individual is too perfect enough as not to show feelings of bias or feelings of respect, as the case may be, towards a constituted authority. So in line with that, we shall take a step further in looking at personnel system. And this is also built in the levels of promotion, reward, and other benefits that are attached to the work environment or the work system in itself. So what type of personnel system may be adopted? Certain features are common to all. They may be termed as foundations of the modern personnel system. They are tenure system, merit system, public service as a life career, system of position classification, and a host of others. Let me pause here and take your minds back to the last class where we talked about the autocratic, the aristocratic, and the democratic type. And we said that no system is entirely sufficient, as in some cases there is an overlap between one system and the other. And sometimes there can be collaboration or an idea can be borrowed from a particular system and implemented in another system. It is all built around having a functional system that produces the maximum result or that meets the objectives of the organization. So this is also in line with that arrangement that we are trying to look at the moment. Tenure system is one of the most important problems of tenure system or personnel organization is that of tenure, by which civil servants will hold office. This simply put is about the year of service or the number of years that an individual is charged with a position within the system. As at present, there are three tenure systems. Tenure at the will of appointing officers. That's at the discretion of the appointing officers. Tenure for a fixed number of years, as known within the civil service in Nigeria. And tenure during good behavior or life tenure. Like we also know within the civil service, we hear of people working for, I think, 35 years or 60 years of age, 35 years of service or 60 years of age. So all this falls into the categorization that exists within the internal working system of either a government or an organization. So staff or employees are accorded some either fixed tenure of years within the service or a protracted or a prolonged arrangement that guarantees them moving from the lowest position perhaps to the highest authority or to a certain category of standard within the system. So we shall be looking at them one after the other, and we say tenure at the will of appointing officers. So far as the tenure of the will of appointing officer is concerned, it does not suit the administrative service. It is the system which is almost universally found in private undertakings, where conditions differ radically from those obtained in government undertakings. This is self-explanatory. It is a comparison of what is obtainable within the private sector in terms of the number of years that an employee can serve within the system. In the former, the proprietor or the manager are not representative of any outside interest, but their whole interest is in having the work done with utmost economy and efficiency, while in the latter, the managing heads are not directly interested in financial resource security. This is a comparison of the private and public sector, like I earlier made mention of. That in the private sector, the interest is about efficiency and productivity. And in most cases, that the tenure of service of these employees at the discretion of the chief executive. But in the public arrangement, it might be that the interest is built around projecting the popular will of the government in power, or as the case may be. And in most arrangements, this is a temporary or a fixed number of years kind of job. Like as we see within the political class, for instance, that ministers are appointed and then they have a tenure of a service or year that they have to put into the service, and maybe another government comes in and then they are laid off and all that. So we'll see that playing out side by side, the fixed tenure arrangement that exists within the civil service, that when a person is employed, unless on the account of gross misconduct or some other infractions, such a person has up to 60 years to be in service, or 60 years of age and 35 years in service before such a person is laid off. So this system would cause severe hardship to the employee by unjust dismissal and also create instability and inefficiency in administration, so that the officers might not work with a high sense of independence and impartiality. It is essential that they must be guaranteed a permanent and sufficient long term. So this statement is simply trying to say that when their tenure is not properly defined and that they risk being removed at will or at the discretion of the executive, such a system is subjected to abuse, and they will not want to put in their best if they understand that I'm only here maybe for 2 years or 3 years as the case. Tenure for a fixed term. The second system, which is the tenure for a fixed number of years, suits only the office of political nature, but does not suit the administrative class because short terms, say 4 years, 5 or 7, can neither provide capable persons nor provide any opportunity for specialization and experience. Let me also explain this relating with what we discussed in the last class, that when the political class or the kingship arrangement decides to pick a person and bring to the highest position within an organization, sometimes can be subjected to abuses and can make those that have served a number of years within the organization to feel not properly attached. Because if you have worked for in a place for about, say, 15, 20 years, and then somebody that has maybe not worked or have the right knowledge or training or expertise or the skill that you have learned on the job is brought to become your boss in such an arrangement, there's a tendency that you will not feel very comfortable with such a system. So, and that is what is obtainable within the political arrangement. That sometimes people are brought in for 4 years, 5 years, case maybe, and then they are now made to be superiors to those that have grown through the ladder. So they are the tendencies that such a system will not provide the desired result, because even those that have the expertise are not the ones in control. And then those that are now in control do not have the expertise that is needed to provide the desired result. So in most cases, when these people come in and about the time that they are now equipped with adequate knowledge, say 2, 3 years into the job, and where they are supposed to now perform effectively, their tenure comes to an end within this arrangement. It is not in all considered effective. So moreover, the system would make public office political spoils to be appropriated. Sorry, I think people is interrupting. Sorry about that. Moreover, the system would not make public office political spoils to be appropriated by the party victorious at the polls, as it happens in the USA. Okay. What the statement is trying to say is that when these people are brought in to do the bidding of the political class that have brought them to power, sometimes they subject the office to a lot of misappropriation or corrupt tendencies that would now show that they are not working in the interest of the organization in itself, but to line their pockets either for individual gains or to further propel the interest of such a party that have brought them to power. So it is a system that is subjected to a lot of abuses if not properly managed. So this statement is trying to say is that the system would make public office political spoils to be appropriated by the party victorious at the polls, as it happens in USA and Nigeria, respectively, where many of the officers and employees are appointed both by the national government and state government for 4-year terms as corresponding with the term of office of the president, with the result that every change in the presidency brings a change in officials and employees. Like we know it in Nigeria, it is not a hidden knowledge that when people are brought under this arrangement, the first thing they do is to first of all satisfy the interest of the political party that brought them to power. Then they go further to use the instrumentality of that office to line their pockets. We have heard of issues of corruption of governors or House of Assembly members or National Assembly members and sometimes even ministers, heads of governments, agencies and parastatals abusing their offices on the premise of the fact that they operate because they have been brought into positions of authority by the government power. And as such, they do not entirely work in the interest of the masses or in the interest of the organization that can be found in the private sector, but for some selfish gains. And that is why the idea of Max Weber's bureaucracy was called to question that impartiality and objectivity as the hallmark of his theory is not entirely practicable, as this system is subjected to abuses when they know that as the government exists, they equally exist the system. So for that, they do very quickly and fastly to ensure that they use the office to gain what they can gain, their own interest. So then there's this tenure during good behavior or lifetime. This is a relatively permanent arrangement. So because the employee understands that he or she is part of the system and will be there for a very long period of time, there is the tendency that such an employee would work in the interest of the organization because he knows that when the organization functions well or when the civil service functions well, the person tends to benefit more than having abuses that is of this temporal nature of 4 or 5 years, as the case may be. So having discussed the first and second tenures, we found out that the third system, that is tenure during good behavior, should be applied to the administrative service. This system will secure efficiency in administration and makes government service a permanent career, a profession which capable men would choose. So if you look at this arrangement closely, it therefore goes to show that because they stay long in the service, they are exposed to more better working conditions, more expertise, more trainings that can bring results in the interest of the organization as against those that are brought on a temporary basis. So having said that also, there is the issue of classification within the system. And we say here that position classification among the various problems of personnel organization, none exceeds in importance than that of affecting a system classification of all employees. Such a classification constitutes indeed the basis of the whole personnel structure. Without it, it is not possible to meet satisfactorily the many problems to which personnel administration has. So In line with this whole arrangement defined from the tenure of service to the issues of objectivity and impartiality within the system, there is also a classification arrangement that exists within the system as well. Then the basic unit of an administrative organization is position, which is different from its incumbent. The duties and responsibility of a post are attached with the position and not with its occupant. What this statement is simply trying to say is that offices are the arrangement that controls the authority and not the person occupying such a position. Okay, look at it this way. Some persons can be described or accorded respect in an organization because they are directors. So the respect goes to that office, not necessarily the individual holding that position. So when the individual is not on that seat or not in that position again, it becomes a normal individual. So the respect accorded or the position that people tend to show reverence to is on the premise of that office and not the individual. Civil servants fit themselves in the position. Positions do not fit themselves to the caliber of the civil servants. What is classification? Classification means grouping together of persons or things on some common basis. In public administration, it means grouping together of posts into various classes on the basis of their respective duties and responsibilities. So you can see that classification, positions of authority are all accorded to the office, not necessarily the individual. So by virtue of the fact that the individual now makes up the person that controls the office, such a respect is accorded to that individual. But when the individual is not in that position, the respect remains for that particular office. So according to Prof. Milton and Mandel, by classification is meant the grouping of positions on the basis of similarity of duties and qualification requirements. Marshall E. Dimmock defines it as the systematic sorting and ranking of positions in a hierarchical sequence according to comparative difficulty and responsibility. Dr. White defines classification thus. In its final form, a classification plan consists of a number of classes adequate to enable a place to be found for each existing position, arranged in orderly fashion with respect to each other and supplemented by a set of rules and regulations for its administration, interpretation, and amendment. What this is simply saying is that positions are accorded respect, and these positions are classified into various aspects on the premise of qualification, technicality, or expertise, or duties and responsibilities that are accorded to such an office. And then the individual benefits from that levels of a classification arrangement. Not necessarily that the individual is the final authority within such a system, that the authority exists within the office that the individual occupies. So the Committee of Position Classification in the Public Service and the Assembly of the United States and Canada in 1945 defined the term that's classification as reduced to its simplest term. Classification of position means the process of finding out by obtaining the facts and analyzing them what different kinds of classes of position exist, calling for different treatments in personnel processes, etc., etc. It further includes making a systematic record of the classes found and of the particular position found to be of each class in a paper titled The Classification and Standardization Movement in Public Service. Still in line with what we have discussed earlier on, that the arrangement is that certain positions fit into certain official arrangements or functions or the technicalities or the expertise that exist within that office and not necessarily accorded to the individual. And then, as found in the United States arrangement, they stated that the requirements of classification system are as follows: the collection of detailed facts with regards to the duties attached to each individual position, which occurs, and with regard to the functions, organization, and administrative procedure of the organization unit. On the basis of this information, a grouping of individual positions into classes. So these are all categorizations of what falls into the classification arrangement. A written definition or description for each class of position, setting forth definitely the duties attached to the position to be included in the class. A written statement of minimum qualification, which an individual must possess in order to perform the duties and the position successfully. A title for each class of position, suggestive as far as possible of duties attached to the position in the organization's unit in which they occur. On the basis of the class definition and definite knowledge of the duties attached to each position, the allocation, the proper class of every position is classified. The line of promotion showing the lower classes of positions from which recruiting is normally done, and the higher classes of position to which employees are normally advanced when vacancies occur. The compensation schedule for each class, giving maximum, minimum, and intermediate rates to be paid to employees holding positions in the class to make the whole plan easily comprehensible. So these are all characteristics or features or indices, or rather, or checklists that exist when one talks about classification. So it ranges from the function to the qualification to the technicality of such a position to the remuneration of such an arrangement and what is expected of each categorization that exists or each class that exists within the system. So all these are built around rhetorics that tends to explain what classification is about within the civil service. And the relevance of that is premised on the fact that positions of authority are accorded to the office, not necessarily to the individual. And on the premise of categorization, different departments, different units are charged with different functions and different levels of productivity, but also towards the interest of attaining the goals and objectives of the organization, which can also, on a broader scale, be related to how a government functions. So the advantages of classification uh, is of two directions. Like every concept within public administration and within the civil service, there are advantages and disadvantages. These advantages may be briefly stated as follows. The first great advantage of classification is that it systematizes and simplifies personnel administration. In other words, owing to this categorization or this allocation into classes and into different categories, it simplifies the job or the function within the civil service or within an organizational setup. With classification, the various posts, which run into hundreds of thousands, are fitted into a dozen classes or so. Take, for instance, the way we have departments and ministries and parastatals and agencies within the government arrangement. It is on the premise of this classification that they are able to carry out their functions and there's no conflict because they all work in the general interest of the government in power. If these posts are not classified and the government deals with each post simply, the burden of personnel administration would be intolerable. Like I said earlier on, it's on the premise of this classification that the job is carried out easily and efficiently. So when it becomes very cumbersome, it therefore makes administration intolerable. Second, classification facilitates the problem of personnel recruitment. It makes possible for the operating service to determine definitely its personnel needs and inform the recruiting agency accordingly. So it is easy to know who is, on the premise of classification, who is due for retirement, who is due for promotion, and where there are vacancies, how the modules should be put in place to recruit people into the system. So recruiting agency prepares the same kind of test for the employees of a particular class and prepares a list of eligible applicants out of which the department makes appointments. Third, classification acts as safeguard against arbitrariness and favoritism in the utilization of pay sales for particular classes. What this is simply saying is that because of this classification, it guides against abuses and excessiveness or high-handedness that the system can be subjected to, if not arranged in such a way that every person understands the duties and roles that such a person is to carry out. A direct relation between salary and work done is established. Fourthly, classification facilitates budget making by enabling those having the duty of training and acting upon the budget to scrutinize without intelligent estimates for personnel and to confine their attention to the number of employees in each class required without having at the same time to pass upon the difficult question of compensation that should be provided for. What this is simply saying is that it even narrows its analogy to the aspects of the salary that people are paid within this classification arrangement on the premise of the position that they hold or the duties that they perform within the organization. That this classification arrangement makes it easier for each person to know the position such a person is to manage, the salaries that are due to such an arrangement, when promotions are due, when retirements are due, and when there's the need for recruitment. So classification simplifies the operationality and the duties that is required within the public service and within the system in general. Lastly, classification fosters the growth of corporate consciousness, pride, self-respect, and morale within each class. Professor Dimon summarizes the use of this system in these words. Based on the principle of equal pay for equal work, position classification is designed to eliminate the injustice of different rates of compensation for the same work in different agencies of government. It also provides a basis for determining recruitment procedures, examinations, salaries, schedules, and promotions, and hence has come to occupy a central position in personnel administration. Thus, classification advances the interests of the employee, the management, the legislative body, and taxpayers. So this is self-explanatory, and it revolves around what we have been trying to say, that classification guides an understanding of how effective the system should be managed, with everybody understanding the roles that such a person is to play within the system. So having said that, there are disadvantages. And first is that there is only one objection to classification, namely that it produces class consciousness amongst the service. The higher class develop a type of superiority complex, and the lower class suffers from inferiority complex. So this is very easy to understand on the premise of the fact that, be based on classification, some persons are considered to hold positions of, say, maybe directorate cadre, and other persons are now found to be maybe on the clerical cadre. There's the tendency that people would naturally feel superior and others will feel inferior within the system. So that is where the pitfall of this categorization and classification arrangement reigns supreme. So having said that, like we made mention earlier on, that there exists a measure or a template for understanding how the civil service operates. And that the earliest practices is built around the spoils system, even though we understand it now, particularly within the ambit of politics, that the system is subjected to some measure of abuse, or people can use positions of authority of these offices to misappropriate certain aspects, or even be found within the web of corruption and all that. There also exists a merit system where this classification arrangement tends to give a level playing ground for people to rise from one class to another. So what this is simply saying is that there is an arrangement that people can be brought from the outside or at the discretion of the chief executive to come and use such an office, perhaps not in the interest of the overall majority, but for certain interest that is tied to the position or where the position, such a position has emanated from. And then there is an arrangement that guarantees a level playing ground for everybody to try and succeed. So in order to have a personnel system based on sound principles, it is necessary that it should be based upon the merit system. The earlier substitutes for the merit system were three sale of offices, the patronage system, and spoils system. Writing about the history of French personnel system, Professor Herman Feiner observes in France until the revolution, almost every office, central or local, except the dozen or so of the highest offices in the kingdom, were attainable only by private purchase, gift, or inheritance. That is under the spoils arrangement. All public offices were species of private property, and voluminous jurisprudence governed their transmission. It may seem odd today to sell public offices to the highest bidder, but it was defended in France in those days on the ground that it brought revenues to the government, enabled the common man to acquire posts, and took the public office out of court favoritism and politics. The patronage system prevailed in England and most of the other countries. Under it, the appointing authority selected the candidates on the basis of personal favor or political grounds. What is actually spoils system? The spoils system prevailed in the US, which was its ancestral home. It simply means that public office constitutes a spoil to be enjoyed by the political party victorious at the polls. What this is simply saying is that we have had an arrangement where people, do I say, buy political offices, or that they are brought from wherever, irrespective of their qualification or expertise, and be made in charge of positions of authority, like we have said earlier on, without recourse to a considerable level of training or expertness, and without recourse to their ability to discharge their duties effectively. So all these are built into the spoil system arrangement. And we have said that it conflicts with an arrangement that guarantees a level playing ground for everybody. Like we said earlier on, imagine a system where, like we have it in Nigeria, anybody can be brought to become head of a parastatal or an agency or a ministry without consideration to those that have put in many years of service. And in most cases, either they are bought or they are given as a result of favors from the political party by the roles that such an individual plays. So it is more like a reward arrangement for people to gain those kind of positions by their affinity or their ties to the positions of authority within the system. When a new party comes into power, it dismisses all the employees appointed by the predecessor and fill the vacancies with its own favorites. So this is self-explanatory. A new government comes into power and removes every person that has been appointed and brings their own loyalists or those that they wish to reward within the system. This system is also designated as hiring and firing of public officials and employees. However, in USA, the system suffered an eclipse in 1881 when President Garfield was assassinated by a disgruntled employee who was removed by him from office. So you now see that the system was in existence in the classical period or in the olden days, and they benefited so much from it, even though we have elements of it now in present day administration, that it became stalled and was not advanced further because when an individual is removed from such a position of authority, they become disgruntled and would want to now create problems within the system. So it was at that point that this voice system began to have some measure of difficulties and without consulting the Civil Service Commission. Thus, the political party in power is in a position to appoint certain employees of its choice without consulting an expert body. People appointed on ad hoc basis gain experience and ultimately on the basis of long experience get selected to the Civil Service Commission in later stage. This amounts to perpetuation of the spoils system. So the whole argument of the spoils system is premised on the fact that anybody can be brought from anywhere, either as a way of rewarding such an individual for the political roles that they play within the system. So there are defects in the spoils system. First is that the spoils system is a bane on efficient administration. Beautifully summing up its evil, Dr. Amanfine has said, sheer inefficiency was the first result, an increase in public cost. Second, the creation of a class of office seeker. Third, political corruption. Fourth, it results into a standing battle between the president and Senate for the control of appointments and removal. We have seen that happening in Nigeria, where the executive will appoint a person and then the Senate or the legislature would now call to question such an appointment, and then there are rifts here and there. And in most cases, you hear them saying they are acting on it, or they are there on acting capacity. So always there is a rift between the executive and the legislature or other bodies when such an appointments are made. But in most arrangements, the spoil system is more like a reward system to political loyalists that exist within the system. Fifth, causes a terrible waste of time and labor on the party of the president and heads of department, coupled with the real pain of refusal of application for office. Sixth, it concludes that never had the state been so debauched, that it's been so abused, because the spoil system subjects everything to the interest of a political class or the chief executive or the king as the case may be, like as we have seen in the aristocratic arrangement. The far-reaching effect of this system is upon the political life of the country. It causes a profound degradation into the life of politicians and tends to place the contest of political parties on a materialistic plane of struggle for selfish advantage rather than one for the achievement of ends towards the public welfare. The spirit of public service is dampened, and its place is taken by selfish interest and political chicanery. What this is simply saying is that because it becomes an arrangement that benefits the political party or benefits the individual that is charged with such a position, that the idea now revolves around primitive accumulation of resources and not in the public interest or in the welfare needs of the society. Third, the employee make an illegitimate use of their office to promote the welfare of their political parties or that of political chieftains to whom they are indebted. Fourth, anything like development of a time spirit service and desire to excel is impossible, as the further promotion of employees depends on the political influence that they can exert. We have heard of cases where people are promoted above their contemporaries on the premise of either being recognized by the political class or some other flimsy arrangement. So all these are indicators of the spoil system, and it is an abuse of how administration should be. Can the person please mute him or her stuff? We can hear you. Kindly mute your mic. Then there's the merit system. In contrast to the spoil system, the merit system avoids all the above said anomalies. Merit system implies a system in which the appointment and condition of service of an employee are determined solely at his own intrinsic merit, which includes his education and technical qualification, personal capacity, and physical fitness, are some of the advantages that exist within the merit system. And then the merit system came into place due to the overwhelming abuses that were found within the spoil system. So if you look at it closely, you would understand that the merit system is the ideal system that should be operationalized within the civil service and other considerations of government. The following conditions are already laid down by the modern civil service regulations. Employees should neither be appointed nor removed on political considerations. Employees should not be forced to contribute money or service to party organizations. An independent and impartial civil service commission should be set up to exercise control over civil service regarding their recruitments, promotion, and other disciplinary matters. The civil service position be filled on the basis of written examinations or other tests. So what this is simply saying is that there are rules and regulations through which the civil service operates, and it should be premised on the merit arrangement, not on the benefits that accrue to allegiance to a particular system. So the advantages of the merit system is that it brings out public administration from the morals of political intrigues and personal caprices and accords it a place on scientific lines. This improves efficiency in administration and purifies political life. Second, right man is put at the right place and full justice is done by providing equal opportunities to all citizens to compete for any office of the state. Third is that it frees the employees from economic worries. The adoption of equitable rates of remuneration and proper retirement benefits relieve them of economic worries. Thus, they are in a position to serve wholeheartedly any political party that comes to power. So what this is simply saying is that on the premise of merit or on the basis of merit, the employee is guaranteed a certain standard that exists within the system that is not subjected to constant interference by the political class. So in that kind of arrangement, such an employee is able to work effectively, and that this very system is the best system that should be operationalized within the system. So disadvantages, despite the fact that the merit system has been universally acclaimed as a better alternative to the spoil system, it still has its pitfall. Since power of appointment is concentrated in the hands of civil service commission, the principle of responsibility stands undermined. Second, it is felt that loyalists may not be recruited and there may be occasional conflict between the political heads and the permanent service. However, these flaws can be easily removed if a proper balance is maintained between responsibility and efficiency. In fact, the flaws of the merit system are not so glaring as those of the spoil system. Hence, there's a tendency to adjust the personnel system more and more fully to the requirements of the merit principle. What is simply saying is that the merit principle should be the guiding principle on how the civil service or the public service should thrive in any functional arrangement, because there should be level playing ground for all and sundry. In conclusion, sorry, I think we have just a minute left. In conclusion, let us be reminded that in this unit, we have touched upon various topics ranging from Max Weber's famous and celebrated theory of bureaucracy, the foundation of personnel system, in which we dealt upon different aspects of modern personnel system. We discussed position classification, wherein we came to know what classification is all about in administrative setup, what mentioning as spoils and merit system respectively. In this topic, we saw how spoil system was an anomaly and an affront in what America and various other countries stand for, and how this disgraceful practice was abolished in 1883 following the assassination of the chief executive of the American system as at that time. culminating into the birth of the merit system, which means the merit system came as an advancement of the spoils system. And the merit system have laid the principles, the procedures, and the regulatory tendencies that guides how the civil service or public service function, which is the only universally accepted practice today, in order to protect the civil servant from arbitrary removal from office and so on. Merit system has all the ingredients of a civilized practice. So having said that, we have come to the end of the lecture, and now the floor is open for you to make contributions or ask questions, as case may be. So are you all there? Can you hear me? Anybody has any question or any contribution to make?
Good morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Okay. If no question at the moment, you can read and then ask your question on the WhatsApp platform or make your contributions on the platform, and then we will discuss whatever needs to be discussed further. And then special thanks to Bola for coordinating and helping us set up this lecture. So thank you, everyone. Then see you on the WhatsApp platform. All right.
Thank you, sir.